Hey, Gary, you sent this to Joe, right? Did you send the teams to Joe?
Yeah. Yeah, you forwarded it to me.
Officially call to order the September 21st, 2022 meeting of the City of Falls Church Planning Commission. Can we please have a roll call, Mr. Trainer?
Yes. Ms. Weiss?
Here.
Ms. Teets?
Here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Mr. Krasner?
I'm here.
Ms. Comat?
Here.
Mr. Hyra? Here. We have a
All right.
quorum?
We do have a quorum. Mr. Puentes contacted me. He will not be here tonight. So we will go right ahead then. First up, the adoption of tonight's agenda. As everyone I'm sure has noticed by now, it's a relatively light agenda, so I guess we're thankful for those nights when we have a light agenda. Just one action item, no work sessions. So otherwise, and a few other perfunctory things. I'm sorry, the minutes, 2 action items. And if there's no other comments or suggestions for the agenda, I would look for a motion to adopt it as it was published.
Move to adopt the agenda.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. So that carries, and we will proceed. So, do we have our applicant? Is he connected?
He's getting connected right now.
Okay. Well, I'll call the case, and hopefully by the time I'm done calling it, he'll be there. All right. So our first action item under item 6 is this is a public hearing on a recommendation to the council on a resolution to amend the voluntary concessions, community benefits, and terms and conditions to reduce the minimum number of theater seats required and provide for the withholding of additional residential certificates of occupancy until the theater lease is executed for the project known as Founders Row on application by Mill Creek Residential Trust, also known as Founders Row Holdings, LLC. Is our applicant connected now? Not yet.
I can go ahead and do the staff side of it, and then he did not intend to do a presentation, would be available for questions, though.
Okay. Well, hopefully we want him to be here, but I guess if he's in the process of connecting, then we can go ahead. I know he's very familiar with his request. So, all right, all right, we go ahead then. Whoever's going to give the staff presentation.
Sure.
Mr. Fuller, go ahead.
Yes, Gary Fuller, Deputy Planning Director. So the Planning Commission is requested to review this amendment to the voluntary concessions for Founders Row and to make a recommendation to the council, schedule their final public hearing on this for September 27th. So that's the time.
Is your mic on? I think
It's green.
oh, just low. I heard you, but I want to make sure that
Let me get a little closer to it. Is
There
that
you go.
better?
Better. I want to make sure that Mr. Muffler can hear you.
Perfect, okay. And this is just a very limited scope change in terms of, it's the special exception, it's related to the theater, and then This is just some text changes to the voluntary concessions related to the theater. So it's very narrowly focused. And so the changes are to reduce the minimum number of theater seats that was required, which was 750 to 850, reduce that to 550 to an 850 range. The previous theater, the VC was based on the number of seats of the previous theater. So with the theater change, it's a little smaller theater, even though it's still 7 screens versus 8, but it does have other entertainment aspects to it, and we'll touch on that in a moment. It also has bowling and arcade and other kinds of facilities. But anyway, so this theater is expected to have about 600 seats. And so we're just lowering that number because it was a minimum that they had to meet, that threshold, and they couldn't meet that with the new theater. So the requested change, that's the main one. The second one was they will have some arcade kinds of use as an accessory use, and listed in the prohibited uses were arcade facilities as a primary use. This being a secondary use, they thought to take the opportunity to clarify that, so they also asked that. The third thing was the council, in conjunction with working on the economic development agreement, which is a financial incentive using the taxes generated from the theater, both food and beverage and ticket sales, to incentivize in the future with payments to the developer and in kind to the theater for the next 30 years, a little under $500,000 a year for 30 years. So that's a separate agreement that the council has taken up, and that's not before us. But what was tied to that was the council wanted some more security in regard to the theater lease being signed, and that is scheduled for by the end of October or before at this point, so within the next 45 days. And so they had offered some additional 16 certificates of occupancy to be held to guarantee that. There was already 20 being held for tenant fit-outs that's more long-term, and they also threw an umbrella over those and said, okay, those 20 plus these additional 16, so 36 in total. And so what this is offering is the 16 part of it. And so, anyway, so the requested changes, the two are related to text changes to the VCs, which, is tied to the theater, and then the other was really tied to the other agreement. It was something they had offered the council as more of a guarantee on the lease signing. So really, that's the narrowness of the focus of this change. And so if you've got any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Are there any questions for staff? Go ahead, Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I do have one question, Mr. Fuller.
And then I can call him direct if he doesn't, I
Okay.
can, take any questions too.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it has to do with the VC amendment withholding 20 spaces, or withholding 20 residential units until 50% of commercial have tenant improvements underway. Is that commercial, the units or space?
That's actually what it is. It's space it's a percentage of space.
Space,
It's not
okay.
units. And so the units are tied to the residential, but anyway.
Yeah, I just was reading through it and I couldn't clarify that. I don't know if that is important to have that specified. I mean, it's probably not a huge
Yeah.
deal, but if there's some confusion there as to one party thinking it meant something.
The
and-
spaces vary, so it was a percentage of the overall spaces.
Of
so.
the overall space,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Because there's different sizes, and everything's a cold, dark shell now.
Uh-huh.
And so, but they've escrowed $3.6 million that's earmarked for that, and so they're doing draws on that as they're doing those improvements.
I did have a question on what is meant in this arcade space by, I think it was gaming and bowling. But that may be better answered by, the applicants. So.
Yeah, I can get him on the line, but I will say what the applicant has stated previously is Paragon, who's the group that's doing this.
Yeah.
One of their nearest is down in Fredericksburg, and so they look to be a full entertainment place. So they're offering, first-run movies, 7 screens, but they also, want to have other opportunities for other types of entertainment. So, they're offering a variety of things, and that's their typical model. And so that's what they do in all their locations. So.
Yeah, I just thought it might be helpful since, we're allowing that use, or
Yeah.
we are proposing to allow that use, that we at least know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably just woefully lacking in my knowledge of current entertainment trends, but when I see gaming and bowling, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
probably thinking back 20, 30 years.
Yeah, the way it was described to me is, they want a family to come in, and a couple people go to the movies, somebody could go bowling, and others could play the arcades and have some food, or vice versa. So it's
Yeah,
kind of
looking
that
at their website, it's
concept.
like they have, the one in Fredericksburg has a bunch of theaters, and then they have a lounge, a full kitchen restaurant, a bowling arcade. I mean, so they have a lot of stuff in there.
I definitely need to get out more often. I can see that.
Mr. Muffler is online.
He's on, but
Yeah.
nobody can hear him.
Is he can't hear us?
Can you hear us? Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, you can hear me, but not the commentary. Well, so it's just Jack and you. Well, it's just Jack, and then he can only hear you. So anyway, so tell you what, I'll just take questions from the planning commission, and I'll put you on speakerphone. Yeah, I mean, at this point, we have some technical things to iron out. Okay, so anyway, I've just presented your request and talked about the 3 changes. Yeah, okay. He heard the conversation to date. He just can't, we can't hear him, so I will be the mediator here. Okay. So Joe, you're on speakerphone. At this point, I'm going to ask if the planning commissioners have other questions.
Any other questions? I mean, I had a couple
One more.
questions too, but
I just have
go
one
ahead,
more.
Mr. Stevens.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Mr. Muff. Just question for Mr. Muffler regarding the,
Yeah, you're going to hear yourself.
got to plow through it, okay. Question regarding the lease signing. I think the target date was October 31st. I'm just wondering how firm that is at this point?
Okay, so you heard that about the lease signing timing?
Yeah, if you're talking to me, I can hear you. I'm trying to like back away from the computer so there's no.
I'm going to have to interrupt. I don't think we can conduct a hearing like this. I mean, he either needs to, if we need to take a recess to sort out the technical difficulty, I'll do
All
that.
right, so
Do we need to take a recess for a few minutes to figure this out?
we'll just take a recess.
'Cause without this,
and
we just
then
can't do it this way. We
See
can't
if
do
you
it.
can try and log in again. We'll-
Paraphrasing what he's saying. So we'll take
So
a
we will
10-minute
send you
recess.
another link and then see if you can do it again. All right, and then call me once you're on again.
You can't do it that way. What is this, amateur hour?
Okay, I'll stay on the line.
The planning commission, we can't do that.
Are you able to hear us? You guys talking, he just can't respond. Back here.
I don't know if,
That just
I mean, I
TV?
think it's just FCTV.
Okay. So he said he was in the waiting room, so I told him you just let him in.
through my computer. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, oh, well, I could just hear you through my computer.
I don't even know where you are. It doesn't even say I'm in a meeting right now.
That's weird.
This is very bizarre. It's just showing me as being in a waiting room. Which is fine. You guys can hear me. That's totally fine with me. I can't hear any of the planning commissioners, though.
Okay.
It's saying waiting for others to join.
Okay, I'll try leaving and coming back and starting the meeting real quick.
Do you hear us, Mr. Muffler?
Could you hear Mr. Krasner right then?
Do you hear us?
I can hear them through your computer, so it's way off in the distance. I wonder if the...
Can you still hear us? Can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
How about me?
Yeah, I can hear. I mean, you're in the distance, but if you yell, I can hear. I can hear you.
Okay. Well, if you can hear us, we hear you loud and clear at this point.
Okay. Yeah. No, you're coming through. I can hear you now. It's just again, it's like you're talking through Jack's computer, so it's a ways away.
Okay. Well, we'll try to speak loudly, and we'll see how we
Okay.
do. But if you
Well,
can,
I picked up on just so you know, I heard everything from the start of the meeting, so I'm happy to dig in and answer any questions, and appreciate Gary leading it.
all right. Well, okay. So we'll re-adjourn here. We're back. We'll come back into session officially. All right. So we now have Mr. Muffler on the line. He can hear us, sort of. We can hear him pretty well. So I'll throw it back up then for questions. Mr. Fuller has provided a presentation, a summary of what the requested changes are. So any questions for Mr. Muffler? I believe Mr. Stevens was attempting to ask a question and when I cut him off. So why don't you pick it back up? If you
I think I'm
remember.
good at this point.
Think you're good? Okay. Let's see. Any other questions for Mr. Muffler? Mr. Hyra?
I have one for Mr. Fuller.
Go ahead.
And Mr. Muffler can chime in too, but it's really just to get me back up to speed. I think this development came online way before I was on the Planning Commission. And Mr. Fuller, you mentioned related to the theater, there's a special tax that comes in, I guess, off theater sales, and that goes back into the development? And
Yeah.
could you just describe that, because I just wasn't aware of that?
Yeah, That's a resolution that's before the council and went to the EDA. It's an agreement between the EDA, the city, and the developer that would incentivize the theater by the taxes generated from the theater itself only, not the rest of the project, related to ticket sales, which we do not do in the city now. It's a tax we put on the books, but we haven't used yet. And then food and beverage associated with the theater only. So right now, there's an agreement that the council's looking at in regard to that and incentivizing the theater by providing the tax revenues in a large way back to the developer for 30 years.
And how much was estimated would be generated? And then what percent of that is going back to the development, and what number is that?
The number is in the 400,000 range annually.
A year, okay.
And then the city gets 10 on one of them, the first 10,000, and then 20 on the other. So the first 30,000 goes to the city, and then up to a cap of, I think it's, well, just under $500,000. Anything above that cap would come to the city after that, so.
And has that been passed already?
That's under consideration by the council on the 27th. That was not referred to the planning commission, only to the EDA.
Can you speak to that? Why wouldn't that come back to us? That seems unusual, because it's related to a development. I know it's a tax, but it's a tax on a development.
It was passed in 2016 for the previous theater, and then it wasn't enacted. It wasn't referred then either, and so maybe they just followed the same format on that.
Okay. All right. I just would say, and this is not really for you, Mr. Fuller, but it is. It is for the planning, and also we have a council member here. That's unusual that it wouldn't come to the planning commission when there is financing related to development. Usually it does come back to the planning commission. I don't think the EDA's role is planning. They do development, but they don't do planning for development. So maybe it should go to the EDA, but it also should come to us. So I would just make a recommendation that actually when this does get referred to us at a later point in time, because it seems that you're kind of mixing things, because you mentioned that the holdback on some of the units is in part related to the agreement of the taxes on the commercial space. So it's all interrelated. And it seems like for whatever reason, the financing part was put to the EDA, and then the other part of this, the sort of holding the developer's feet to the fire and the commercial, was put to us in this resolution tonight. So, I mean, there probably should be a fourth point, which is the financing of the sort of, I guess, rebate on taxes, or whatever you want to call it, incentive that gets generated and goes back to the developer as opposed to going to our city coffers. I often think that we do development in part to generate tax revenue that we then reallocate to other parts of our city, and we're generating tax revenue and then giving it back to the developer. That sometimes makes sense, especially when you have economic decline. We don't have economic decline in this city. We only have our property values going up, our commercial spaces going up. So I would question why we're doing this. Why would we be giving an incentive back? I mean, I want to see this happen, but at the same time, how much of an incentive are we giving, and why are we giving it?
Yeah, the EDA has reviewed this, and the council is in the process of reviewing this. And the basis that they're looking at is that they wanted to see a theater for the community, and this developer committed to that, where they normally wouldn't have included that as a commercial tenant in their project. And so at this point, they've, even with the marketplace and what it is, they've held the developer to providing the theater that they had promised. And so this was part of their previous agreement with the previous theater, And so they're redoing that again, so. yeah.
Yeah, again, I wasn't here in 2016. But again, I would, if I was, I would have said, why are we doing this? I mean, other people want to see parks, other people want to see affordable housing, others, maybe somebody wants to see a pool. These are all things that can be done by floating bonds that we pay for, or by taking money from the tax base, which we're trying to generate with this development, and kicking back, like, helping the developer pay for a theater. That just seems very unusual. And I don't recall ever, and I mean, again, I've been in planning for a while, where a developer got incentives for a movie theater. But, you know, hey, we'd like a movie theater, but we have movie theaters in Ballston, we've got movie theaters in Tyson's, we've got movie theaters in Mosaic. I guess we want one here, that's fine. But at the same time, why are we paying for it as taxpayers? Because we basically are. That seems odd.
Just one comment on that. I think when the city's EDO office did their economic analysis for this project, they incorporated this particular arrangement along with the parts that are producing positive tax revenues, and it still came out overall as a positive. I'll just say that as kind of a general comment, if that's of any help. I mean, I think your point is valid, but hopefully this was incorporated into the earlier review.
Can I comment as well? When this was all discussed, one of the things that came up is like, it's very difficult to get a theater without the developer doing most of the, it's not like a restaurant that will come in and lease the space and pay for their own build out mostly. Theaters won't do that. And the reason, and so people typically want theaters because it does bring people in. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know if you're a regular moviegoer, we go to the movies quite a bit. And most of the theaters we go to, like the AMC 16, are quite busy all the time. So people are going to the movies. I actually think the Paragon Theater is an even better choice because it has a variety of entertainment options that are not available in the city. We don't have places for our older kids to go. So the advantage really here is that a good portion of the city, kids can walk to this. And so I think there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot to be said for the fact that it's going to be multiple restaurants. You could go and eat with your kids, and then they could go to the movies, or you could go to the movies with them. It just gives you a lot of advantages. So the thing is, so as we looked at the economics of it, we were not going to get a theater unless we did some type of deal to help them, because otherwise it was going to be cost prohibitive, and they couldn't afford. Well, the other choice would be to put more units. And I think none of us really want to see things get much taller than what they are right now. So, I mean, most citizens don't like things being beyond 7 or 8. And so the only way you pay for that is you put more units in. And so I think the balance is that we wanted that theater because we want to have some entertainment choices within the city for our older kids and our families that we don't have. We have a lot of bars, which is really fun, but we don't have a lot of that kind of entertainment, and we've been chasing that for a long time. I mean, this need for that this has been coming up. I mean, I've been hearing that for more than 20 years. That like, why can't we get more kind of venues in the city for our teenagers and families? And so, other than that, we just have the bowling alley, and half the time you can't even get in there because of league stuff. So it's that was what the discussion was about, and by having that theater there, all of the restaurants in that building are more likely to be quite successful, and we do make quite a bit of money off of restaurant taxes and things. So there is some real advantage to it.
Can I just respond quickly?
Go.
To keep it short.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't question the need for multiple types of entertainment here, and this is one that we don't have in our city. I guess my questioning is just, how much do you want to pay for that? And I would think, again, we can't revisit this now, but just this is maybe in the future when another development, because other developments will come through. It's like, do a one-time payment. Don't do 30 years? We're like, I understand like it makes it easier to pay, but think about that. We are paying for that movie theater for 30 years. That seems really odd. We're not subsidized, who else are we? We're subsidized. We took out a bond, right, for the high school. Okay, that makes sense to do a long-term sort of payment. But this for a movie theater? That seems just strange. And I, be honest, I haven't ever seen that before. So it's like, do we want it that, are we putting a movie theater on the same, parallel to our school, our high school? Because it seems like we almost are in the way that we're financing this. Again, I wasn't here then. Mr. Fuller, when you mentioned it, I just wanted to get the details. Now that I have more of the details, again, this is a very much of an anomaly. If anyone has any other information that's seen other municipalities do this for a theater, I'd be really interested in hearing that, because, again, I don't know everything. So, but I think it's important just to put that on the record, and, I mean, we can vote how we want on this resolution. I think it makes sense to obviously change the seating, but it's really odd that we financed this, or we are incentivizing the developer in this way for this particular amenity. That seems very strange.
Thank you, Mr. Hara. And yeah, there's been a history to this. And obviously, the world has, sort of changed since I recall the conversations back at the time. And I think in some ways, even the way the city views itself, I think at the time, and this is just me, this is my opinion, so take it for what it's worth. I feel like there was more of a sense when Founders Row was first coming through the process. I mean, the city was still, I think, in a mode of, well, we need to attract these types of developments here because they sort of wouldn't come here otherwise, and we need to really attract them. And I think that's where this came from. I mean, as far as I understand, because I do remember the meals tax part. I mean, that's the other part of this. There was like the meals tax sharing, revenue sharing. But this, I guess, the new part now is the ticket sales sharing, I think. I don't know. I mean, maybe Mr. Muffler, can you still hear us?
It's actually.
I am.
Yeah,
the
maybe, I
reverse of
mean,
that.
I guess a couple things. I mean, obviously, you can respond. I know, it's part of our materials. There's a letter from you that kind of explains what you're at, back from March, that explains your justification for what you're asking for, and related to that, as well as the other changes. Maybe it would be helpful for you to kind of explain sort of where the development is today. I mean, I think that would be helpful, just an update for the public to know where things are today. I mean, I visit the site frequently. I live nearby, and occasionally I see contractors working on things. So I'm hopeful that restaurants are coming very soon. But why don't we start out with maybe a sort of where things are now, and then maybe step back and talk about what precipitated this, and from your perspective as the applicant, and what generated the need to make this request.
Okay, I will try to be succinct. Buckle up as we go back 8 years, but just starting with where we are today, there is a lot of activity going on at Founders Row, whether you can see it or not. And I know it's a kind of a trust me thing, but yeah, I've got some notes written down for you all because I assume people would want to hear the raw numbers. As of today, we have 8 concepts at lease. That does not include a movie theater or any other tenants that are not formally at lease. The movie theater, we'd anticipate having a lease done before October 31st. That's the milestone that's in the EDA agreement. So today, 8 concepts are at lease. That's 50% of the non-theater retail, or about 30% of the overall retail. The theater, like I said, we will anticipate signing that lease within a month. Once that lease is signed, we will be 70% at lease with the retail at Founders Row. Of that remaining 30% of the retail after the theater, we're in negotiations on every single solitary space. And it should be noted that over a third of that remaining space is one space, which is the old brewery space that was at lease when the revised special exception was approved in 2018. That concept went bankrupt. That's a huge space. It's like 9,000 square feet. It's our junior anchor. And I'll be very candid. It's rare that you sign a junior anchor before you sign your senior anchor, which is the movie theater, right? So long way of saying a lot of momentum on the retail side. Our first 3 restaurant tenants are opening in about 6 weeks. Ellie Bird, the Michelin star restaurant, I'm pleased to announce, received their building permit today. They will be on site beginning construction tomorrow for an opening early next year. And then of the other 4 concepts, they're in various stages of design and permitting, and more coming by every day. So again, you've heard me say this for a while now. We were effectively set back by 18 months from COVID. We went from 50% leased to 0% leased, and then we were functionally not able to sign a lease for a year. So now we're catching up to where we said we would be all along, with a tendency that exceeds kind of that expectation. And then in just terms of the history of this economic development incentive, one, it should be noted that this predates me. I've been with Mill Creek for quite a while. I've been involved in this project for a very long time, and the concept behind this predates me. What I do know historically is that the reference point is that the BJ's located within the city's limits, also had an economic development incentive associated with that construction. And effectively, that was a use that the city highly desired, but for economic reasons, the developer there needed incentives, and a concept similar to this plan was passed. So back in 2014, 2015, when it became known from council that the theater was, effectively the primary use, like this development was built for a number of reasons, one of which was to bring, maybe most importantly of which was to bring a theater to the city. Frankly, our partners in Mill Creek just made it known that we would be happy to do that. But the economics associated with a movie theater in a project like this are infeasible without some relief from the jurisdiction, if this is a use that was required. And that's the general history, right, of the basis of the economic development incentive. The initial agreement conceptualized this admissions tax sharing. And one of the things that, it's an incentive plan based on the admissions tax. One thing that needs to be noted is that this is not some kind of TIF pilot program. We are not getting property tax relief. We are not getting, frankly, guaranteed payments. What we are doing with the city is sharing in the revenue that's generated by the theater itself, with the understanding that the theater itself is going to generate substantial revenue, both in the residential and by revenue, I mean tax revenue in the residential and in the commercial, not only in Founders Row, but in surrounding, right? It's a rising tide effect. So in 2016, council and the EDA determined that, in light of the economics, which were reviewed by a third party that the city hired, that this was all very reasonable. And that's where the admissions tax came into play. You fast forward to the last year or so, we've been very public with our commitment to bringing a theater to the city, while also being very public with the harsh realities of what that new world looks like. Been very transparent that this deal is not good for ownership. It will be a loss for ownership, substantially so. The extra dollars required to be put into this theater are in excess of, or rather are in the 8-digit range. It's significant, the difference in the structure that we have today versus where we were 7 years ago. So the basis, as you've seen in the justification, is if this was reasonable 7 years ago and the city still wants a theater, we'll be very transparent. We'll share our economics, and we'll say that it should still be reasonable today, that not only did this agreement still hold, but there needs to be additional incentives as well. Very similar to the admissions tax, though, we have not asked for a pilot. We have not asked for a property tax relief. We've asked for a sharing in the revenues generated by the theater, this by way of the meals tax. So in total, if the theater performs to maximum ability, the city will capture the first $30,000 in the tax revenue generated from those two uses. The developer will capture the next $490,000, and then the city will capture anything above that. And based on projections from the city, that's meaningful to both parties. And then those dollars increase every year, and there's all kinds of other caveats and milestones held to it that I'm happy to discuss nuance if you'd like to. But that's the history behind this incentive plan. That's where we are today, just based on the economic climate. We've tried to sincerely work with council and EDA and staff to put together something that is a win-win. We think we're there. And I sit here today very genuinely telling you that, knock on all of the wood in the council chambers, we should have a lease here within the next couple of weeks with the movie theater, which is a pretty remarkable achievement given this climate that we're dealing in. So that's a summary, Mr. Krasner. I'm happy to offer any additional context.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Muffler. Any questions, any additional questions from Mr. Muffler? Mr. Hyra, did I see your,
Yeah, it's not necessarily a question, but it's just more of a comment that, we usually provide tax incentives for public goods. And I would just say that a movie theater is not a public good. We'd like to have a movie theater, but it's not a public good. It's not a public high school. You have to pay to go there. And so if the economics aren't there for a movie theater, they aren't there. I mean, I would love to have the Washington Wizards at stadium here so I can go watch basketball, but the economics don't work to have them here. So if the movie theater economics doesn't work, it's a private enterprise, we should not be subsidizing that. Or at least we should be
Although to be
very
clear,
careful,
If you
very
were to get a
careful.
sports venue, like at a stadium, you would pay for it.
No, we wouldn't. I mean, cities do all the time, but they usually lose,
Saying,
right? I mean,
that's
St.
the
Louis
example you give is a place where most municipalities will pay to get a stadium or.
I know,
you know,
and it's
because That's how
wrong.
they get them.
It's wrong. They shouldn't. They shouldn't subsidize them because it's usually an economic loss for the entire city, and it leads to economic inequality. So I don't want us replicating that on a smaller scale, and it seems like we're kind of already gone down that path. So I just want us to be careful because we mentioned the BJ's. BJ's also private enterprise, but maybe people would see a grocery store as more of a public good because people need that to survive. They need food. They don't need to go to a theater. I'm not saying, hey, I want my kids to go there. I would love to have a theater. I just don't want us paying for it as a public body. And if we are going to pay, we should be very careful with how much we pay and how we pay. And it just became news to me that this development is possibly going to receive this benefit. And also we know that the same developer is asking for other things for a development right across the street. How much do we want to get intertwined with a development entity that is consistently asking us to use our taxpayer dollars to kind of bail them out? I know they can't control the economic climate of the country, but it seems like we're going to constantly ask, oh, the climate's bad, could you give us more money? The climate's bad, can you give us more money? And it's like, well, when do we finally say, well, it's bad climate, we can't do this. We shouldn't do this. We should stop. So I want us to be really careful as we move forward with Founders Row 2 and anything else that comes before us that developers are asking us for money.
Just for the public record, I do need to state that we are not requesting any kind of relief for Founders Row 2. And I know you're not meaning to imply that, Mr. Hyra, but I just want to make sure it's not misconstrued as such.
Thank you, Mr. Muffet, for the clarification, and thank you, Mr. Hyra, for your points. I mean, they're well taken. I mean, I was not on the commission at that time. Founders Row 1 was approved. I don't know if a few of us here were there, perhaps, but I think we've all kind of inherited this to some extent, and ultimately the council will wrestle with this, I guess, and make the call about whether or not this is a worthy endeavor to share, the revenue. It's a very valid policy debate, and I think, it's certainly something that citizens of the city should chime in on through the council, I suppose, as the proper mechanism when they have their public hearing on this, I guess, next week. Is that right, Mr. Fuller? This is going to council, assuming we act tonight, this is going to the council next week on the 27th of September? Is that
Yeah,
right?
this item is scheduled for the 27th.
Right. So, since, just to keep us back on track, I mean, again, it's a very worthwhile policy debate. I think, for better or for worse, the council didn't refer the revenue sharing agreement to us for our comment, and I agree with you. Perhaps they should have. It's intimately related to the project and to the request to amend the voluntary concessions, since it's all kind of tied up in the financing of this project and making it work, down to the changes related to the number of units to be held, the C of O to be held. So I would agree with you that it perhaps should have been. I'm sorry. Speak up. So anyhow, so that's my 2 cents is that I agree. I think we'll have to make a recommendation tonight based on what council has referred to us. But certainly I think there's a process that's available to folks to participate directly in the decision on the other part that wasn't referred to us. Ms. Weiss, go ahead.
What I wanted to, I think one of the issues here is the staff report. This issue was brought up. The letter describing the agreement is brought. I mean, there certainly there's discussion of this the separate economic agreement or that was not referred to us, but the staff analysis doesn't address it at all, and the fiscal impact assessment doesn't address it at all, too. And so I think what I would suggest is that this memo or this staff report, what I'd like to see in the future is a more holistic overview of the entire project, all the pieces. And we see that very often, but I think in this case, maybe that was a miss. And staff analysis or like some commentary on this other issues before City Council and a really thoughtful analysis as to why it didn't come to us, and then a holistic assessment of the fiscal impact, I think would be helpful, and then that would better equip us to think about it ahead of time and respond to it. And I just wonder if one of our recommendations to council could be, we want to see the whole picture next time. Don't refer just a piece of the puzzle to us.
Right. I concur. I mean, those are, again, good points, Ms. Weiss, and I would concur. I don't know why. I mean, I do know, well, I can surmise there are reasons why people might assume that the EDA, is the better venue or that they should hear something and we shouldn't hear it. But I mean, I would agree that it's tied up in the VC changes. I mean, for example, the VC changes that are before us related to the how many C of O's should be withheld, and the escrow. Perhaps staff could or Mr. Muffler could just expand on that. I know that's being offered up. Some of those changes are being offered up, I think, as part of the package for the revenue sharing. And I don't know, maybe there's some more background on how those numbers were arrived at, and just sort of where we're at as far as the C of O's and just where that change is coming from. Again, I don't
I'm happy to. So again, all of the numbers, be they the COs, the thresholds, the caps, all of the nuance on this was thoroughly negotiated with staff, with council, and maybe more specifically with the third-party reviewers, plural, that the city hired to review all of our economics. We signed an NDA, open books to review all of our projections, current revenues, et cetera, right, to arrive at these numbers. So just to be clear, the 20 units that are held back for 50% of retail, that was derived back in the original agreement. So that's been on the books for quite some time. The additional 16 units was effectively, and you know what, staff is going to recall this better than I am, but it was to achieve effectively a certain percentage of units that were held back, something that would, I'll be very honest, be punitive against the developer. Like, that was the goal. It was to say, hey, if you're going to ask for this, we are going to make sure that you pay for it, right, in terms of performance. And I also want to be clear on something. We have not signed this agreement. We have held back those 16 units since March, right? So for 6 months, we have not leased units that we could have leased because we're proceeding in good faith with a signed term sheet from the city that, assuming we meet the milestones, this will be advanced. So this has been a true partnership from the get-go. It continues to be so. I completely understand the perspective of members of Planning Commission about, high level, should we be subsidizing private enterprise? I want to be clear, that was a conversation on council 7 years ago. There were members of council who shared similar feelings, and ultimately it was decided by council in the city, right, that the theater warranted this tax sharing agreement. And so then we as the developer obviously financed it, built it, did our best to tenant it, and then the world changed, and now we're re-tenanting it. So I'm not pushing against anything that you guys are saying, other than to say, right, this all goes back almost a decade. We've been stacking this stuff up to get to the point where we are today. We've proceeded in good faith. I know the city has done a really tough job of negotiating with us and working with us, and we appreciate that. And this is where we are to execute on the development plan that we all agreed on 6 years ago.
Thank you for that, Mr. Muffler. All right, and I agree. I mean, in the world, of course, just to add more, I don't want to pontificate too much or add more commentary, but the world certainly has changed and evolved over the course of those 8+ years, and I think it's debatable if this was coming in today, right, if the same agreements or arrangements would have been supported by a majority on the commission, on council, but right, we've all kind of inherited this, and the pandemic delayed it, and so here we are. Well, so for the commission, I mean, again, we're presented with these. I mean, there's a relatively small number of these voluntary concession changes that we've just discussed. And so, I mean, at this point, I mean, we can deliberate on those. I mean, if we want to include in our motion other comments, I think we can certainly do that to let council know how we feel. I mean, they don't have to listen to us, but we can certainly tell them anything we want. If we want, even though they didn't refer it to us, we can always give them our 2 cents, and there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose. But as far as a formal recommendation, we'll have to, the formal recommendation will have to be on the specific changes that were referred to us for the revisions to the VCs. So, I guess at this point, then, are there any other questions on that aspect, on the VC changes, for the applicant or for staff at this point? And I'm not seeing anyone. It is a public hearing. I don't see anyone present in the audience other than one of our council members. And so if anyone else, though, does anyone else sign up to speak remotely or testify remotely, Mr. Trainer?
No.
Just checking. And I don't believe we received any written correspondence on this item, did we?
No, I don't believe so, no.
No, just checking. So to the extent we opened a public comment portion, we'll close that. So again, bringing it back to the commission then, so time to deliberate and decide what we want to do with this. As I think you just heard me mention, it's supposed to go to council next week. So they're looking for our recommendation tonight, one way or the other. So what's the commission's pleasure? Anyone prepared to make a motion or have any other words of wisdom they'd like to provide?
Accord, did you want to go? You look like you were about to say something.
No, I was trying to support the motion.
Can I just make a comment?
Go ahead,
before?
Mr. Hara.
I know a lot of times we, meaning us, the planning commissioners, we get something that's referred to us by staff and a resolution comes up, and often, we debate and we tweak the resolution. We try to put language in that could give a suggestion or advice to the city council before they approve something. And I think at certain times that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure maybe some of you are thinking to do that. Ms. Weiss, I know you always like to do that, and you do give good feedback, I think, to the council. But I would also say that we are a small town, and I think people understand where people sit on things. And I feel, at least for me, the best thing is just to not vote for this, even though I want a movie theater and I want to support this development. But the way in which things keep coming to us, or maybe not even coming to us, because it went to this financial aspect, went to EDA, it's like at some point you just got to say, you know what, no, it stops. Like, things have to change. By us just giving suggestions, sometimes it makes a little bit of a difference, but most of the time it doesn't do anything. And So I just feel with this one in particular, even though I will be honest, supporting the arcade, I support changing it to the arcade. I also support, going from 750 whatever to 500. I mean, seats. I mean, what's the big deal, right? Those things help this development get done. But the fact that we are not even voting on the finance and our public tax dollars related to this development, and we weren't even considered, that for me just leads to, okay, I have to vote this down. So I just want to express to you guys why I'm not going to vote for this, and it's not due to not supporting some of the resolution or some of the changes in this resolution, and I'm not voting it down because I don't support this development. My goodness, I want to see this development. I know when I tell my kids that I just voted against this, they're going to be like, you voted against the movie theater, Dad? How could you? And I have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. But I think it's ridiculous that we weren't even asked to look at the financing. And then the financing that we weren't asked to look at is related to point 3 in this resolution. That somewhere, somehow, staff, city council, somebody has just got things mixed up and weren't thinking correctly. So I think our job is to say, pause, rethink this, and then move it forward. And I know time is money, and when you do that, it costs somebody some money. But you know what? I'd rather cost some money by saying no and getting it right than just keep passing things and approving things, and in the long run, that costs us a lot more money in tax dollars or in a development that isn't structured correctly, or it wastes our time because we're just here rubber stamping stuff. So I'm done. You get my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hira. Thank you, Mr. Hira. Yeah, I appreciate those comments, and I appreciate the sentiment, and I can't say I'm in any kind of, diametrically opposed to anything you just said. I think I share a lot of the concerns as a commission, again, the way that things do come to us, especially things of this nature, kind of things that seem to have been negotiated, sort of independently of us and kind of brought to us as a perfunctory step in the process. Maybe some might perceive to be an inconvenient step in the process that has to happen. But so I would agree. I would agree that we saw similar types of things on the West Falls project. We may see more. That seems to continually crop up, and then we're seeing it. We've seen it a couple times on Founders Row. Some of that again relates to events, sort of ongoing in the world, and but sometimes there are other things at play. And I agree. It's unfortunate when we're not sort of, I don't know. I think given the respect as a commission, I agree that the idea that we all put in our time and come out and spend a lot of time reviewing these materials and agree to volunteer to do this, and when we're not sort of given, I think anything more than just what's I think the proper respect as an arm of the city. I would agree. I would agree that it's concerning at times, but I know that sometimes these things are. I don't know. It's a small city, and I think there are sometimes where certain folks are taking the lead on things, and maybe they're inadvertently doing that, and it's not. At least I like to think that it's inadvertent and not any kind of intended slight or anything like that. But anyhow, so I'm rambling on, but we still leaves us where we are. We kind of know Mr. Hira feels. We need a motion one way or another on this, so.
Can you pull the motion up on the screen? Like, scroll down? Okay, that would be helpful. Yeah, I guess part of the key problem is that none of this motion has anything to do with the financing. So the question is, I know you were saying that you don't know if adding comments means anything, but we can still add comments if we'd like. I don't know if we would want to this motion. I guess the thing about it is, as I was here when this deal was made, and at the time, based on all the financial records and everything we went through, it made a lot of sense to us. And the BJ's has actually made a lot of sense. There were people who were saying, why are we helping finance bring BJ's in. Well, our other choice for that property was car dealerships. And we didn't want car dealerships there because we make no money off the car dealerships. All tax revenue for car dealerships goes to the state. So I would say that BJ's was a really successful example of us using, this revenue, but we're not, in the way, we're not really giving them money. Basically, we're just giving a part of the tax revenue we would get. So I want to make that clear too. We're not making payments to them. We're making a partnership where we're giving them some of the revenue as it comes in to get something that we want. And like I said, I think the BJ's was successful. But, if someone wanted to add something onto this, we could possibly do that, but I'm willing to do the motion if we want to move forward.
Go ahead, Ms. Weiss.
I just have a question, because the staff memo says that the fiscal impact of the voluntary concession changes is non-existent. I guess my question is, what is the fiscal impact of the entirety of the proposed changes? And is it true that, so the staff report says the proposed amendments to the voluntary concessions assume the same development program that was previously approved and associated fiscal impact. I guess, but there's another piece of the puzzle that hasn't been brought before us that would presumably have a fiscal impact. So
Yeah, and if I can pitch in here, sorry, there was a fiscal impact that was shown at the council hearing in August when this was presented. I was looking through my records. I do not have that, but the short answer to it, right, is that we are now requesting $150,000 of tax revenue, of additional tax revenue from the meals tax, and that's effectively the fiscal impact on a simple form. However, if you look at the way the sharing works and the way the new projections have been updated, the reality is it's a different fiscal impact. So it's kind of a means and methods approach to how you're looking at this, but this was presented at the council hearing on August 8th.
I guess I'm sorry, I'm both tired and not a municipal finance expert. So I guess my question is, is that statement in the staff report true? And I'm not accusing anybody of lying. I just want to be really clear about that because I know that this is all brought to us in good faith and I guess was debated and decided 7 years ago. And so maybe I'm assuming that unintentionally not bringing us the full picture, but I guess were we presented with the full fiscal impact of the full suite of changes associated with this project? And if we weren't, do we need that before we can make a decision?
Well, the staff, in terms of physical impact, the proposed amendments to the voluntary concessions assume the same development program and was as previously approved, and the associated fiscal impact. And so the changes before you of the number of seats and the accessory use being defined has no impact on the fiscal impact.
That I understand. I guess I'm just saying there's this other piece, the economic development agreement, that presumably does have a fiscal impact. And so that's what I'm just trying to parse. Those have been parsed out separately, and is that the right way for us to look at it? I mean, another question, I guess, is what is the Planning Commission's authority here? Are we barking up the wrong tree, or?
Well, I mean, we
don't have authority when it comes to financial aspects. That's actually technically true. We don't, and that's why sometimes we aren't involved in it. But as part of the package, it would have been nice to have that in there. So part of me was thinking it would have been nice if we could push this off to our next meeting, but we can't because the council's meeting on the 27th. If this was a month from now, I'd say we could push it off and just ask. And normally, if we ask for it, they'll give us a financial overview. I'm looking at the EDA staff report, and it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't look like there's that much of a change, but that it would have been nice to have had that.
I agree. I was kind of looking for that. It was referred to a couple times, right in the EDA report, and so we didn't have it. At a minimum, right, it would have been good to have that background to understand what they looked at and when they made their recommendation, since they were the only group that got to, I guess.
I was at the EDA meeting, and they didn't really get into the overall financial situation. They looked at it from a narrower perspective, you know, what's there now, so.
Okay.
I think some of the differences is when looking at the EDA's thing is that when it was originally set up, ticket prices were assumed to be around $9. Now, the average ticket price is more like 12. That's including matinees and all that different. And the food and beverage spending is much higher in this, and it's partly because of the type of theater this is. With the other entertainment venues, you tend to spend a lot more food in the bowling and the gaming areas. So I think so some of it may not be that affected in terms of a dollar amount because the overall price of tickets and food and beverage expected is higher.
I mean, I don't know if it's the right answer for us to kind of thread this together without the full picture in front of us. I guess, my question now is, what is the impact of asking for this and then coming back to it? And is,
I mean, I
does
think
that
we defer it-
tank the whole thing, or what happens?
Well, I mean, doesn't this is for staff, I mean, doesn't the council need the planning commission recommendation in order to do something, or what happens if we
They
don't?
need a
act?
recommendation, but they don't need us to actually recommend it. We could recommend against,
Right,
and then they could still vote for it.
right.
It's just, I don't know if this is, on special exceptions, it causes a supermajority needed by the council, meaning that 5 votes have to be for it. I
Right.
don't know if this would cause a supermajority situation, because it's not a special exception.
It's in the ordinance somewhere, I don't know if,
But either way, they just need a recommendation, then they can
Right.
move forward.
right. But if we defer it and make no recommendation tonight, what happens?
I think they just go without, I don't know. Have you, Gary, do you
Yeah.
know what happens in this situation?
I mean, I think on this, if you don't make a recommendation, then they would have to continue their meeting.
Okay,
We would have
Yeah, I
to-
think they need it. I don't know. They
Yeah.
might-
We would have to renotice, and they would have to renotice, and I'm not sure what you're asking for in the interim.
yeah, I
You
mean,
want a copy of the ordinances before them, TR 2236, that's been given a first reading, and, so that material's available. I mean, I'm not sure what you would ask for in the interim.
I think what I would suggest asking for is for the staff report to be updated with a discussion and analysis of the proposed changes to the economic development agreement and the fiscal impact of this overall package of changes and above and beyond just the 3 voluntary concession changes.
I mean, it's in the other staff report on the agreement. Do you have that in the list? I'll go get it.
you mean the EDA one, or, yeah, no, it's,
The TR 2236.
Is that posted on the website now, for council for next week?
I have it.
yeah.
Do you want me to read the fiscal impact?
Yeah.
This agreement calls for a possible $490,000 in annual incentives for the theater component of this project. Of this $490,000, $340,000 was contemplated in the original 2016 agreement, and $150,000 is a new incentive. So I think the bottom line is it's a $150,000 fiscal impact. The last 2018 projection of net annual fiscal impact for the Founders Row project as a whole was a range of $1.7 million to $2.1 million. Projected annual theater meals taxes were previously projected to be $136,000. Assuming the prior 2018 meals tax projection of $136,000 and subtracting the $10,000 that the city will continue to receive with the new theater operator and subsidy agreement, this represents a $126,816 reduction to the projected net annual fiscal impact of the project. So yeah, 126.
Right, so the range changes to like 1.2 to like 1.8 or something like that.
1.7.
Yeah,
It was 1.7 to 2.1.
yeah.
Okay. And again, getting back to technically, unless it's in as far as what the planning commission is by statute, what we do, we certainly, we recommend or make recommendations on the voluntary concessions, on special exceptions, on rezonings. And anything, anything beyond that really is not directly in our wheelhouse, although a lot of times it's related. So in this case, I mean, that agreement between this, it really is in the purview of council, and council alone. I mean, they technically don't have to refer it out to anybody, I don't think. I mean, they may have asked the EDA to comment. I don't know if that was required, unless the EDA is somehow involved as an entity. I don't know if they are. So, right. So, but I certainly, again, am in agreement that it provides some background. I guess the material was available, but it wasn't alluded to. I mean, maybe just in the future, that's just a kind of a general recommendation to staff to try to give us as full a picture as possible. In some ways, more information is always better than less. Don't omit stuff. It's always better to give us more stuff to read than less, because it's hard to make us cranky by giving us too much stuff, as opposed to omitting something, and again, intentionally or unintentionally. I've learned that myself over the years too. Anyway, so as far as the changes go, I mean, I mean, again, for what it's worth, I'm prepared to act on this tonight. I think that anything we would ask for, I mean, I think I don't know if it would change. Either I feel like either you sort of understand the reason and for these changes to the VCs and are okay with the additional holdback of COs as sort of as a guarantee, or you're not. So I think that as far as what we need to know, I mean, we kind of know that some of it's being driven by changes from the new potential theater operator, and then the other part came from the negotiations that were outside our purview, but on what folks felt was an appropriate holdback. I mean, I suppose if we can comment on anything directly, it would be on whether or not we think we want more of a guarantee to ensure the theater happens, as far as holding back additional COs beyond what's being recommended here. I mean, I think that would be the most relevant thing we could comment on. So I guess, again, I would say I'm prepared to act, but it'll depend what the rest of the commission wants to do. But if someone's ready to make a motion and we can kind of debate what it might look like, we can do that. Or
Yeah, why don't I go ahead and make a motion, then we can debate it. We have to kind of move forward in some way. So let me make the motion. Whereas an application for a special exception amendment and related revision to the approved voluntary concessions, community benefits, terms and conditions dated August 10th, 2018, and as amended February 22nd, 2021 for the Founders Row mixed-use development has been submitted by Mill Creek Residential Trust Founders Row Holden LLC pursuant to the procedures set forth in sections 48-90 and 48-455, special exception of the city code, and whereas Mill Creek Residential Trust submitted a narrow application to amend the previously accepted voluntary concessions, community benefits, terms and conditions, commercial theater conditions to reduce the minimum number of required theater seats, clarify that the amusement uses are permitted as accessory but not principal uses, and withholding of additional residential certificates of occupancy to guarantee the theater lease sign-in. And whereas the Planning Commission finds the limited proposed changes and amendments to the voluntary concessions to be reasonable for the movie theater use and consistent with the previously approved Founders Row mixed-use projects, objectives, and plans, now therefore I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of Resolution TR 22-35 to City Council for public hearing and action on September 27th, 2022.
Thank you, Ms. Teets. Do we have a second?
Yeah, I can second it, and just to add a comment, if I may, I actually agree with Mr. Hyra. When I was reading through this agenda item, I almost had to laugh with how de minimis the issues were. So then the issue comes is, how do you communicate with either the council or perhaps our colleagues in the planning department that really the planning commission should be used for in a more substantive manner. And I'm not sure that voting no on this is the way to do that, but I can certainly appreciate the thinking behind that. So I'll leave it at that, but that's my thought on this.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? I'm not seeing any. Oh, wait, no, I'm seeing one. You just yell at Mr. Chairman, otherwise I'll probably won't see your finger. So go ahead, Mr. Ira.
All right. Thank you. It's just one small comment. I know sometimes we think about what's under our purview as a planning commission versus what are things outside. And if we kind of look at this, and the fiscal impact was pretty minimal, right? It was $150,000. That isn't very big, but yet, why wasn't that just in our packet? And the other point I want to make is that we do have a lot of power on this commission. We determine the zoning. Anytime there is a zoning change, it has to come before us and we have to vote on it. And that is our outright authority. It's not the council's authority. And when we make a change on changing the zoning, we change the price of property. And we change it substantially. And that property gets taxed. So I just want us to think and be cognizant of where our power lies. Who cares about this one little thing? It's $150,000. When we make some of the changes we have made, and since I've been here, we have affected a whole lot more than $150,000 with zoning, just how our city is zoned. So just let's think about where our power lies, where we can make a difference, and where we don't have to recommend to the council. We tell the council. Because often we think of our body, and I know this, as just a body that is advisory. We are not an advisory body. We are a planning body that makes decisions and helps our city get planned better, and that affects fiscal things, our taxes, the price of property, and what can go where, and what it costs. So let's just try to remember that as we make these decisions. But I do feel like often we ourselves as a body think of ourselves as advisory. And if we think that way, I guarantee the planning staff thinks that way, developers think that way, the council thinks that way. And again, when I was in Alexandria, the land use lawyers came to the planning commission. They did not go to the council because they had to lobby the planning commission. And has anyone met with the land use lawyer besides, the people who come to our public meetings, but one-on-one? No. They go to other people because they think that's where the power lies. They negotiate with our city manager and our attorney and our council members. They don't come to us. So if we do want to have more of a stake and not be seen as advisory, when things come before us that are split up and don't make sense, you have to vote them down and tell the council, stop. Tell the planning staff, stop. I mean, Paul Stoddard is not even here. That should be telling. He is the director of planner, and he's not at the planning commission meeting. I don't know who on council advised him to change his mode of operation. Mr. Fuller, I'm glad you're here. I want you to be here, but I also want Paul to be here. The fact that the person who is lobbying for the developer for this action item is not even in front of us, that's telling. So we're going to have to change the way we act and the decisions we make to change the power. So I'm sorry to put this, I thought it was a light load today. Everyone was like, this is going to be easy, we're out of here, we're going to go have a beer, we're going to go watch some baseball. But I think this is important because I know all of us put a lot of time into this.
Right.
And we take this very seriously, and we all could be doing other things. We could be with our families, we could be out, we could be making money. We don't make any money doing this. We do this because we love this city and we want to make it a better city for our kids and for other people who move in here. So if we're going to spend this time, I want to be taken seriously by our developers, by our staff, by our council, because that's the only way that we are going to have an input to make a difference. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ira. Any other discussion? I'll chime in one more time. I've been chiming in too much, but, Mr. Ira, I completely agree with you. I think it's been simmering for a long time. And I completely agree with you that that oftentimes as a commission, I've felt relegated to a very, again, perfunctory, rubber stamp, type of role, and I think it is very telling that Mr. Stoddard's not here. I get along with Mr. Stoddard great, and I work very well with him. I don't agree with it. I think the planning director for a city this size should be at the planning commission, at least sometimes. But I think it is very telling, and I think it speaks volumes for the fact that Jim Snyder used to come to the meetings, and then he stopped. Paul Stoddard used to come to the meetings, then he stopped. And so it seems to be that, it's viewed as, again, a sort of something that someone's got to do. But if you're important enough, you don't have to do it. No offense to you guys. I think you guys are very important, and we're glad you're here. But I think, that it speaks a lot to say, I've seen the change happen. And again, I think, and I think you're right. It's very telling about how large projects are done. I'm the chairman of the commission. I mean, not that I'm special, but I've been serving in that role. I don't think I've ever been contacted by anybody Paul calls me occasionally. We have a set up call where we chat, but beyond that, right, developers, land use attorneys.
Well, if it makes you guys feel better, I have been, and recently. But I choose.
Well, they
not-
like you then.
But I choose
So-
not to meet with
Yeah.
them.
And I'm not saying we should be meeting with folks on our own, but I mean, even
Yeah,
just
I don't
kept in
think
the
we should
loop
do
on
it.
stuff, given like a sort of a courtesy heads up about things that are coming or not coming before us. So I completely agree. I mean, we do have certain statutory, limits, and ultimately council has the final say on many, many things, or maybe most things. But we do have a certain role to play, and I would agree, we should at least be partners in that. I mean, that's what we're here for, and we all could be doing other things. And so I would agree, there's been this pattern of sort of these changes that are presented to us with little advance notice, that are almost like a fait accompli. It's already been kind of decided by whoever it is, the city manager, planning director, others, maybe the EDA sometimes, and EDA chairman and other folks kind of decide stuff, and it then just kind of shows up on our plate like, well, you guys got to do this. So I would agree. I hate to vote no in a protest vote, but I'm going to vote no on this one. I hate to do that, but Mr. Hyder convinced me, and I'm kind of tired of it. So I'm voting no on it.
I have a question because I'm persuaded as well. But if we made a motion and it was seconded and we vote against it, does that mean we are not recommending, or does that, and what's the difference between
Yeah.
not recommending versus deferring?
It would just mean that our recommendation failed, so we would be not recommending.
Right. You don't have to vote no to, like.
It'd be open for a new motion then.
If someone wanted to make one,
Also,
right,
Yep.
Yeah.
right.
So it just, like, if we didn't, I mean, I guess we would have to come up with another recommendation maybe, but,
So,
yeah.
all right. Well, we heard of the discussion. Any other discussion? If not, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Weiss?
No.
Ms. Teets?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Comont?
Yes.
Mr. Hyra?
No.
Mr. Krasner?
No.
Motion does not pass.
We tied, right? 3-3? So, right, so a tie doesn't pass. We need 4 votes to do something. So, at this point, if anyone wants to make another motion, otherwise, again, no action is equivalent to a recommendation of denial, essentially. So, we don't have to vote to deny or anything like that, but.
Yeah, it'll just it'll go to the council as that the recommendation failed 3-3. So the question is, the ones who voted against it, did you want to send a comment to council about why you voted against? Because otherwise, it's just, all they know is it failed 3-3, pretty much.
Well, I mean, we're on video, kind of laying it out there, but I mean, I don't know if we need to make a motion. I mean, perhaps maybe we can start a dialogue and
I guess
do
Phil
that
can tell
offline, but, yeah, I mean, maybe this is an opportunity to, we can maybe speak offline about it. Some of the stuff I think is maybe better dealt with, offline than in public session, but I think that, I think we've made our point tonight, and it'll be recorded for posterity. So, all right, so there we are.
Can I just add one more comment,
yeah.
though, to record for posterity, just because I have a great deal of respect for Mr. Stoddard, and I just want to support him, particularly as, he's got a lot of other things going on in his life. We're many parents of children on this commission, and he is a parent of children, too. So
Right,
I
I
have a
know
lot
he-
of empathy for.
And I know he's spread thin, and I'm not trying to, again, say that he should be at every meeting, but I think that, I think it's good to see him here once in a while, and we're very grateful to have Mr. Fuller with all his years of experience here, and we don't think of that as any kind of, second rate. So I didn't mean to imply that, Mr. Fuller. I hope you took no offense to that, but I do think I've watched as, directors have kind of decided they're no longer coming here, and it just, the signal it sends, and I think that's more what we're saying, not that we don't think we're being staffed appropriately, it's more the sort of the optics of it, so.
Well, and I guess I would just add, why is the direction from city council not to refer the whole package to us? So I guess that's whoever is
Right.
making that decision, whether it's the director of planning or a city manager or city council itself, it's a bigger picture than just one person.
Right. There are probably many issues, and maybe we can have a dialogue offline and meet with some folks and talk about it. And that's something probably I should try to take the lead on, which I will try to do. And again, apologies to Mr. Muffler, to not take it personally. We are looking forward to this project happening, and it's unfortunate that, again, some of these things are not directly related to Mr. Muffler and his request tonight, but it's where we are. So, all right, well, we'll move on then. Hopefully the next item is not quite as controversial. The item 6B is the minutes of August 17th. Anyone have any comments, edits, concerns on the minutes?
Wait till you guys hear all the comments I have for this.
Fiery speech on the minutes?
I've got none.
Deal on the minutes? All right, well, that's something, I guess.
I make a full-throated motion to adopt the minutes.
Second.
Motion and a second. All right, any discussion on that? If not, I think we need a roll call vote on that one.
Ms. Weiss,
Abstain.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Comont,
Yes.
Mr. Hyra,
Yes.
Mr. Krasner.
Yes. Okay.
Minutes adopted.
That passes. The minutes are in the books. We have no work sessions. That takes us to item 7. No work sessions. Information items. We have, let's see, any planning commissioners' reports? Anyone on this?
Well, I attended Rexon Park last week, because they finally moved to a different Wednesday so that we weren't at the same time. So it was the first one. Well, I kind of would sometimes go to a few of them early because they start at 7, but, and then leave, but when they were online. And this actually was their last virtual one. So it looks like, I think almost all the boards and commissions have to move to live meetings next month because the emergency is like technically over at that point. Except that they're keeping some of the emergency usage of outdoor seating, like where it's taking up parking spaces, they're still going to allow that to go on for a little bit longer. But anyway, they took our comments and worked them. What they kind of did is insert them in the document where they would go, and now they're reviewing them and seeing if they're going to integrate. But it looked like most of our comments they're going to integrate. The ones we did. Oh, and this is on Fellows. Sorry, I should have said they were talking about the Fellows property, about the the park plan, and so they're going to integrate most of our comments. The ones though, like where we talked about the site plan and having a sketch and all that, that won't go into this document because it happens after this document is done. That's part of when they start to actually get the funding, and then they start to work towards the site plan and what they're going to be able to do. So this is just like this is just a view of what the plan is. But, and then most of the other boards and commissions a lot of them had very similar comments that we did about, keeping it mostly natural. I think we were the only ones that pointed out that the stone wall was a good feature. So we won on that one. So that was really good. The other thing is I did, for my husband's business, we had a booth at the Fall Festival which was finally back to pre-COVID levels. Last year we had it and it was fairly busy, but this year it was packed. Just really active, lots of people. Probably could have used like 4 or 5 more restaurants, so hopefully now we're showing some big numbers. We'll have some more restaurants next year for the taste part of it. But it was just really great to see a lot of people outside, a lot of non-city people too, a lot of people from adjacent, Arlington, Fairfax. And so that was really nice too. In fact, I had one of the developers came by to talk to me about stuff, and he was like, I don't see any people I know. And I said, because people do come into the city to do stuff as well. So that's good.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Teets. Anybody else? Go ahead, Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I've got a couple regarding that EDA meeting where they also addressed the Founders Row. They did some other things too. They did support the memorandum of understanding with Wesley. This is the company that's going to take over management of the 5 units at Virginia Villages. So that process is moving along, I think, successfully. And then Jim Snyder gave an interesting talk on the concept of parklets, which was kind of a new one for me, but it kind of sounded like you would take I guess we would call it paper streets, and spruce them up, and kind of taking after Mr. Brown's Park as an example of that. So I thought that was very interesting, and yes, Jim Snyder does attend the EDA meetings on a regular basis.
And just one comment on the parklets, that's actually a long-term concept. The ESC put a report out, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, where we pointed out all the paper streets and uses for them, included in parklets. So it's nice to see.
Well, that's what came to mind, because to say, well, I remember the Planning Commission had talked about.
Well, the ESC put the
Years
report
ago.
together, sent it to the Planning Commission. We've looked at it several times. And it was a combination of ones that could become trails, which some have become trails now, like I think Cedar's example of that, going to the bike trail. And then we had and then the other one was where they could become parklets.
Well, the urgency on this one was that the thought was you could use ARPA funding to do this. So it was good, very interesting concept. At the Chamber of Commerce luncheon yesterday, Paul Stoddard gave a very interesting talk on the overall status of development in the city. I thought it was very well received by the audience there. And then finally, on the Coalition for Smarter Growth, they gave the walking tour yesterday evening, and I thought that was very positive for the city as well. I was also pleased that there were a number of people from Fairfax County who were there to hopefully kind of bring along the other two parts of the overall project to hopefully get a little bit better grassroots support. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Conley.
I attended the CACT meeting on September 14th, and they had a discussion of the NTC program. They've rolled in some of the parking restrictions that have been requested by neighbors on Westmoreland and Lawton into the NTC program. I'm still not totally clear on why, but Jeff Sykes said it made sense from maybe a staffing perspective or process perspective. So I think those are maybe decided at this point. They differ. Lawton has some existing restrictions on their street from kind of the era of the metro going in, so parking is already restricted there from 9 to 6, and they're now adding overnight restrictions on Lawton, I think, as they did in the Winter Hill neighborhood. When the Harris Teeter project was built, the rationale being to support the TDM plan and prevent residents from parking. But the result, I think, will be that parking will be pretty much restricted. I don't know, it might be, maybe they'll just go ahead and put up 24 hours a day, resident only. So my concern is just, that does not comply with the city's policy on parking near businesses, and it also is the kind of opposite of the result that our neighbors on Westmoreland had when they requested parking restrictions on their street. So just something to think about. Seems a little unfair, and I'm never a fan of our policy not being applied evenly, but in this case, I guess there was an existing restriction. There was a letter that a couple of CCT members sent to Mr. Shields and City Council asking about this issue. So maybe we'll hear more on it. I still feel that we need a more holistic look at some of these grandfathered parking restrictions and decide if they still make sense today. So that was one thing. The CACT also had a joint session with council on Monday. I don't know if you all had a chance to watch that. They talked about 20-mile-per-hour limits on residential streets, not including collectors. Those would remain at 25, or the major arterials or minor arterials. Those would remain at 25, I believe, but most other streets would be 20. It sounded like there was a lot of support from both council and CACT for that change. Police Chief Gavin was there, and she also supported the change and said that the officers would be able to enforce it, but everybody agreed that that needs to be combined with actual physical changes to the streets. It can't just be signage. So that is possible. I think that's going to come back to council in the future. And the other thing that they talked about was basically the idea of tactical urbanism. If you all watch the council meeting, I can stop recounting it for you, but it was a very interesting discussion because the idea of doing this quick hits project is something that the CACT has been asking the Department of Public Works to do for a while, and so Public Works Director Zach Bradley brought a proposal for how they would do it. But as part of that proposal, he also shared that, the city has been underfunding maintaining some of our roads and bridges, and a lot of our infrastructure, our core infrastructure in the city is actually in pretty rough shape. So as he said, yes, we can do these smaller projects, but we also need you to know that you've not been funding the core infrastructure of the city appropriately for the last 10 years. So I think there were some questions on council about why they were not made aware of this. There were some pictures in the presentation that Mr. Bradley gave that were pretty alarming, like 4-foot-long holes in the Oak Street Bridge, the steel supports. So definitely a big issue. I would encourage you all to go back and watch that meeting because it was some very important, interesting issues discussed. And let's see, sorry. I also attended the CSG walking tour. I thought it was interesting meeting a new group of folks. A lot of the same faces from the city were there, of course, but some other folks from outside too. And I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Actually, didn't I just hear that the Sharrow Bridge, like there was some
Yes.
some like emergency weight restriction that just got put into place?
It will be in place until that bridge is replaced, is my understanding. It is also now, I think, in poor condition. So
Right,
the city has funding to replace that
Like,
bridge.
school buses can't even ride over it now.
Correct.
They
Yeah,
have to-
the schools had to reroute the bus. So yeah, I mean, it's a real issue. I'm glad that Mr. Bradley brought it to council. I wish it had been sooner, but
Yep.
here we are.
Yep, and totally agree with you on the holistic look at parking restrictions. That's definitely a topic that I think, it deserves a big picture look, because right now it's just done, ad hoc, depending on who screams about what at what time, and it's just, that's not the way to do it. So, agreed. Okay, any other planning commissioner reports? If not, then I guess we're at the planning director's report. Mr. Fuller.
Yes, thank you. In looking at our upcoming schedule, T-zones, we've been staffing that item and developing the materials for that. So we'll be bringing that to you in October for a work session. And then in November, tentatively, we're looking at another follow-up work session as we continue to work with you on that. And then through December, where we would do public hearings and so forth. So, for the next 3 months, that's part of our core program in front of the commission and also with the city council. The Byron special exception related to the retail uses, and there's a application in for that. We staff had reviewed it, provided some comments on it. We felt that it was incomplete, so they've resubmitted. So now it's ready to move forward. They're asking for an amendment to the VCs to allow some uses that aren't allowed now, specifically salons and others. And so that'll be coming before you as well as the council, and we'll have a work session on that so we can kind of go over it with you, the particulars. So in terms of CIP, we're targeting a kickoff on that, trying to do it earlier in November this year. So we're working with Cindy to see if we can set that up. And then the other things that I just, were under the planning director's report, materials that were sent to you. We have the annual community profile that was provided in your documents. Please take time to go through that. I think it's very informative. We've highlighted the number of grants that were received this past year, which are significant. It also talks about public investment, private investment. It talks about the latest population updates based on the census. And then there's a AARP livability exit index that's used to measure the percentile and the variety of community factors and public health and safety, the city compared to other jurisdictions. I thought that was informative. So anyway, please take some time to look at that as an informational item. Also, there was a park connectivity study. The Tool Design Group, which was funded from the Virginia Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, recently completed a technical assistance study and the design recommendations and cost estimates for pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and that would better connect the W&D Trail, city parks like Berman, Howard Stream, Valley Park, and Cavalier Park. And completion of the study is a council work plan item for the next 2-year work plan, and staff will use the study for preparing recommendations for future CIP items as well. So that study was provided to you as background information as well. Also, the Economic Development Office published a newsletter, and we provided a copy of that. That's something new that they're doing. So anyway, so those are some items we wanted to share with you, and hope you have time to look at those. Any other questions? That's all I had for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
Sure.
Mr. Stevens?
Just a quick comment. I did read through the community profile, and that's a good document, I think, to have. I've been complaining in recent years that it didn't include the city's greenhouse gas emissions results, and this year it did. So I should, to be fair, give credit for that. However, right now, of course, it points out that it's not declining for the city, and so hopefully having it in there will help give a little impetus to actions needed to start to get that moving in a downward direction. But thanks overall for the overall profile.
Yeah, now that's in there, we'll be able to track it. So yeah,
There you go.
There you go.
Okay. Well, I lost my place here.
I have one quick
Oh,
question.
go ahead, Ms. Teets.
No, I'm just wondering, I was looking at the emails from the Paul Rothstein, the guy on West Falls Church Questions. So a lot of his answers are like on our website. So do you guys like respond and like give them links to things? Like, because he was asking like what our development would look like, and he also had a whole section about he doesn't think anything's going into the Founders Row. So, I mean, and that's like in the EDO newsletter, it has it all listed. And I'm just wondering what we do with those kind of letters.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't respond to it, but other staff did, and he had asked specifically that we pass on his comments to you, and that was a specific request, so.
Okay, yeah, it's just,
But yes, we do address them to a large extent and providing information.
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean, his email was definitely hard to decipher in places. But I kept going, there's an answer to that. Just go to the website.
Yeah, and we were, he asked for that to be forwarded to us, and He was asking questions also of the various Fairfax County officials, and yeah, that project continues to work its way through the county process on that side, and he's very involved in that, so that's for sure.
I think he lives in the county, right?
I believe he is a county resident that lives.
Like he lives in the village from what he was
He
talking
li-
about, the
yes,
village development.
That's where he lives, right, yeah, right, so. Anyhow, so we have those, we had.
Your best friend now.
We had the CSG walking tour, which it sounds like some folks attended, and Councilwoman Hardy had Paul forward us a link to an article from Strong Towns about small lots. Actually, it was pretty interesting, so folks should take a look at that. Otherwise, that brings us to the end of the agenda. So if there's not any other final parting words or items that are not on the agenda, then we'll call the meeting adjourned as of 9:21.